Okay. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here, and again, for something completely different. My name is Ben, this is Tommy, and we'll talk a little bit more about ourselves, but we're working with very small amounts of data, and we're going to talk a little bit through the why. We work for Executive Homes, which is a home builder in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We recently started expanding into Oklahoma City.
Very exciting. So, I'm sure you're all wildly interested.
Right. My name is Ben. Just a little bit about me. I have a background in statistics, did data architecture at Mongo for quite a while, and then moved to Datto, where I deployed on Galaxy, a very, very large cluster, managing 500 million to 700 million records a day. And now we're dealing with much smaller quantities. And
hi everyone, I'm Tommy. I actually got my degree in math, but I started my career out in signal processing, of all things, kind of vestige from my advisor. But I started at this DoD contractor that had, basically had me doing detection and classification work, and that really randomly kind of sent me into this data science world that I had no idea existed. I don't know if it existed at the time, maybe that's why I fell into it. So I'm going to be kind of representing like the algorithmic development side of the house, which is why I'm the dum-dum to the architectural side of the house over here. But Ben's been like a really great addition to the team. I think he's really helped complement sort of my own deficiencies with what we're doing here. So why are we here? Who are we? So Executive Homes, like Ben was saying, we're a small home builder out of Oklahoma. Really trying to kind of create this bespoke experience for home building. So you buy a plot of land, you can design sort of all the different elements you want, and we'll handle sort of all of the messy work dealing with the contractors and making sure everything is actually getting built on time and correct, and you are getting exactly what you want out of this. So hopefully taking all the pain points out of that process.
And if anyone buys a house in Tulsa and has us build it, I will personally make sure that it is done right.
Guarantee right there.
We're really going to talk about why we're using Trino and why we're doing it at this scale. But spoiler, it's the connector architecture. Data integrations, and
just to give you an idea, so you have at least like a rough idea of where we are in our presentation. Probably more for me to slow down because I talk too fast.
Yeah, so as to not bury the lead, really, it's all about federation, and I promised myself I would make a Star Trek joke, so there it is. Thank you. Much appreciated. What we're going to be doing here, we're going to give you a little bit of background on why we use Trino.
I'll give you a background of exactly why we're using Trino.
As I break things, I'm so sorry.
The original start of where things went in Executive Homes.
I'm really messing things up here.
Technical difficulties at a tech plan. I love that.
There we go. Back to it. And then Tommy's going to give you a run through of kind of what the data platform looked before and after Trino.
It's like.
So you're processing how much data exactly? Let me tell you. Not much.
Yeah. Far cry from petabytes. Right?
Yeah. Realistically, our largest table is about 2 million records, so about 1.5 gigs. Not a ton, but we have it in a lot of different places, and that's really what we're trying to work through. And what we've really optimized for, I've deployed very, very large processing platforms with Trino. I think it's great, but we really want to be flexible and meet the business where it is, as opposed to kind of come in from the data science side of the house and say, you got to do things this way, and this way. Everything you've done is wrong. No, we just want to be able to integrate with it and then move on with the actual value that we're adding.
All the fun stuff.
Exactly, the fun stuff. And we know that we can scale Trino, obviously. And ergonomics. I think SQL is fantastic, and presumably you all do too. It's super portable, it's very ergonomic. You can do some crazy stuff with it if you really want to. And it works with everything.
Now I get the pleasure of describing Executive Homes when I started it. So like picture it, Sicily, right, 1902. Like not really, I just couldn't help myself. I always have to do a Golden Girls reference if I get the opportunity. But so when I started there, I've been with Executive Homes about a year now, and when I first got there, I was really the only data scientist, the only one really doing the kind of algorithmic development for the company. So I came in, and this is what I had available to me. And that meant, on a team of, let's say at the time, it was about half a dozen or so. Now we're more than double that. This was really just a passion project from the other developers on the team. That is, I'm most comfortable with this database. I'm most comfortable with this. The company itself has been using Google Sheets or Airtable to kind of store all of their data as well. It was kind of everywhere. And I feel like that's not something that's unfamiliar in this space, especially in a kind of small startup or sort of the smaller side of the house.
Show of hands, anyone that's had to deal with something like this before?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so a large portion, excuse me, of the beginning of my tenure at Executive Homes was really spent just doing like parsers and ingestion programs and stuff, really trying to just make sure that I'm not only bringing it in correctly, but also joining it to everything else in the correct way as well. So I'm not screwing up, I'm working with the right data, and all of that was done just to get me to the part that I wanted to actually work on, like the actual development side of it. And I hate the fact that that's kind of wasted time, I feel like really the loss of that is palpable, but you don't necessarily quantify it a lot. And I feel like people don't focus on the fact that this is wasted time that is also wasted money, especially for engineers' salary kind of hours. That's not cheap money there. And I think what Trino really has helped out with, I'll pass this right back over to Ben, because before Ben, this was a mess, and we finally started getting to the point where we were looking to the future. They want to expand quickly, which means data is probably going to skyrocket at certain points. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is going to be able to handle that in the future. And so how do we do that? Well, we have the systems in place. Let's see if we could find somebody that might make this better for us. So I went out looking, and thankfully we were able to snag Ben. Ben came in here and showed me up and made everything easier for me. I'll let him take back over.
Yeah, and so again, hopefully for this crowd it's obvious, but I think when you look at content out there on the internet or from other talks and conferences and meetups and things like that, you don't really hear about Trino being used for small and medium enterprises or for smaller scale kinds of things. And it's something that I feel like is very overlooked, but think about it. There's over 35 connectors and more every day. It's fantastic. It's super easy to deploy, especially if you do it with Galaxy on Starburst or with any of the other vendors that offer it as a service. If you want to do it yourself, have fun. I'm not going to be the person doing that. I'm happy to offload that work to someone else. And it was super cheap and easy. So within half an hour on, I think it was probably my first or second day, I had this deployed and integrated with 3 or 4 of our different systems. And just to give you a real idea of the volume that we're at, we're using the smallest paid cluster, and it is wild overkill for us for the amount of data that we're processing.
Putting things in perspective here,
Yeah. So it's like a 2-worker cluster, and that's about 40 times as much power as we need.
Yeah.
But it's still so useful for us because it's so quick, so easy to integrate to all of this different stuff. And like in the before time, it was a pain.
Prehistoric, pre-Ben.
Yeah, a bit of a conceit there, but things are a lot better now that we do have this single point of entry and this single way of accessing data from all of the different systems that we use. And when we talk about data integrations, I'm going to sort of run you through a bit of a hypothetical situation. But really, if you can read it, you can process it.
So I get the pleasure now of kind of walking you through at least sort of one of our use cases. Again, you probably won't be looking for this PR anytime soon because you probably wouldn't care about it, but I'll at least get to explain sort of why we use Trino, how this actually made our lives a lot easier. So really just kind of stepping through the ingestion process itself, kind of why, I kind of already touched upon it a little bit, but sort of why the pain points are there and what we were trying to fix with this. Then get into kind of the fun stuff, what I actually wanted to do, which is actually manipulate it, develop, really kind of dive into the sort of algorithmic development and actually start doing some fun stuff with the data that we have. And then, whatever you want to do with that afterward, whether that's pushing it to a dashboard for the Office folk to ingest themselves, posting it just to your own Postgres database or wherever you're going to be storing this extra data. But really just going to walk through the process itself. So if you can imagine, construction industry isn't necessarily jumping, cutting edge kind of tech world and by any stretch, right? I mean, I feel like we were lucky when I started that they weren't using paper. So,
especially in Oklahoma.
yeah, also a very good point. So when like I was saying, when I first started, let's take an example of one of the projects that we were working on recently, which was trying to, let's say you have a certain house, certain details about the house, certain locations, et cetera. And you want to see if you could predict kind of how long you might expect it to stay on the market. If anybody could actually predict this, I'm sure they would have already, right? But like, we're going to try and do this now. And like I was saying, the Office team themselves, they're familiar with the spreadsheet format. They're familiar with data entry and that kind of aspect. So there's going to be plenty of a wealth of data for that, I'm sure, all coming from the Office team, just for our own personal records. But then at the same time, what kind of inference, what kind of prediction can you do? What kind of model training can you do on a small home builder that's building on the order of, thousands perhaps of houses over the course of years? That's just not really going to cut it. And so, we basically had to go out, see if we can kind of find some data that would actually help us out. So we found a data vendor that would also allow us to kind of integrate some of the local demographics information and get an idea of sort of what neighborhoods are what and kind of how these things are changing over time. Just to kind of help us contextualize even some of the houses that we have. But then on top of that, again, we have like a couple thousand houses that are kind of in our database. How do we fix that? Well, let's go to MLS. We could always ingest like a ton of data. They have everything from the whole country, wealth of housing information and sales and everything. So why not ingest that as well? Well, where are all of these different data sources? Like I was saying, for executive homes, we were storing this mainly in like spreadsheets and stuff like that. Our data vendor with the demographic info was an easy data dump into like S3 or so on a weekly updated basis or so. MLS is coming with the same kind of almost auto updates in a different, Postgres server that we're kind of ingesting from. I mean, you can have your, this architecture, I'm sure you can imagine, like we've said already, can be erratic. It can be all over the place. But this is probably not the conference to say it at, but I don't really care. I want to do the fun stuff. I want to get into the work. I want to look at this, really be able to dive into this. This is what kind of I loved about data science. I was able to sort of dive into it, really see if there's patterns, see the stuff that's actually kind of popping out of the data itself. So I just needed the data. I didn't know or care really where it was or how I got it, just that it was easy in a lot of ways. And so, now we're going to be saying, I have all of these different data sources, let's combine them. Now I have something I can work with, right? I have location information from our own personal records. I have location information from MLS that's going to really beef up our entire data list. And then, our data vendor will also be providing stuff like the demographic information, flood zones, crime rates. I mean, the whole thing kind of spans the gamut, right? But you can kind of now see something like from what EH had initially, which was bare bones. This is the house we built. This is the statistics of, the details about the property. This is when it sold. And that's great. I mean, I'm very impressed with these sort of records that were held in and of itself. But now we have a really great, enriched data set that I can work with. And from there, we can, really take that kind of process and make it easy, I suppose, right? I don't have to write the data parser anymore. Thankfully, I can also just depend on Ben to a large extent. But I'm not pulling from Airflow. We're not going to be using Airflow. We're not going to be using all of these different sorts of software to really do all of this work for us. Like, we can literally just, and he's converted me on this one, just rely on Trino for this kind of fun.
And we are the whole data science team.
Yeah,
so
you're looking at it right here.
I'm not going to spin up Airflow and deal with Spark and manage all of that. I'm going to run a Galaxy cluster, let Starburst manage it, and I'm going to run things on a schedule because that's really all we need. So there's no need to overcomplicate things. We'll scale it when we need to.
Right. Alrighty. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of records. Wild, I know, right? So, you know, this is not going to be something we need the real orchestration to kind of handle. Spark isn't going to be necessary for this kind of scale or order of data. And, you know, now we have something that just like we can query on a schedule, on a regular schedule. And huge kudos to Galaxy for that, because this has been really awesome. I really appreciate that. So walking through this process, right, we're going to basically ingest, like I was saying before. I can pull from, if I'm going to be pulling from Google Sheets, if I'm going to be pulling from XYZ, all I have to do right now is configure the connector. And I mean, I know all of you know this. I'm sure I'm kind of preaching to the choir here in a lot of ways. But, you know, having just that set it and forget it kind of Ron Popeil type of infomercial kind of thing right there is so easy. And the fact that, I know this is also going to be a little denigrating, but I understand it. I think there's like a lot to be said just for the simplicity of the software itself. And so, you know, now that we have our connectors to our different data sources, our vendor data that's getting dumped into an unpartitioned bucket in an unpartitioned table in S3, we could literally just combine all of it, create that enriched data set in a view.
As mathematicians, we have left this exercise to the reader.
Yeah.
So
didn't provide it, but I'm sure you'll be able to figure this out for yourselves. And really, you know, do whatever you need with it. I think like this is where the fun kind of comes into play. Again, like not to be that kind of bougie person that feels above it all or whatever, but to some extent, I kind of have always felt a little bit like a customer of the data. I don't want to have to really fuss around with it a lot and do that kind of data wrangling. I want to get to the fun part. And I think the fact that this sort of comes in and just wipes clean all of the garbage that you have to really deal with and gives you a real centralized kind of point to access almost everything you want, and then also a centralized point to dump it wherever you want. I think that's really where the power of this kind of comes from. Yes, you can handle petabytes. Yes, you can absolutely scale this up. But I think what's so important about a situation like this with respect to a smaller company is just how fast and quickly things change. Like what I said when I first started, we had data everywhere. And in the 6 months it took for Ben to, before Ben started, we had data everywhere else as well. I mean, it was moving, it's a moving target, and I think the fact that it's real simple to kind of easily step in, do a reconfiguration, and then you're all set, right? I think that kind of scalability lends itself really well to this sort of small or medium kind of business model, as opposed to necessarily, you know, also helping out in the larger enterprises. But being able to sort of set a company up right from the ground to some extent in a way that allows them to scale from, let's say, thousands to tens of thousands of records to millions or billions or however many you want kind of thing. Having that infrastructure in place that allows you to scale up without a lot of fuss and without having to bother the other teams for this and that and everything is a huge time saver. And a huge time saver is always great to the C-suite because you're saving money, right? And who doesn't want to save money as well?
That's it? Yes. Thanks for coming to our. No.
Yeah, right?
No. So, yeah, you know, it's obviously a little bit more complicated than this. There are some concerns that we are going to have around managing the data, access controls, that kind of thing. You know, we do have pipelines to some degree. We want to make sure that they're idempotent. We want to do all of those things as well. But the core concept is very, very basic what we're doing here. And I would argue that before you add more abstractions, see if you can get rid of some first, because it'll really save you a lot of headaches in my experience. And like, surely we don't really, yes, we really do this. This is exactly how we are set up and deployed right now. We have things that are going to be running in the background as we are not dealing with them, which is exactly how I like it. And again, if it starts to get more complicated and you find yourself like reaching for Spark, just use the simplest tool that you can to send SQL off in order to your Trino cluster and let that process it. It's almost always going to be faster than running Spark. It's going to cost you a lot less money. It's just going to be a lot less fuss. And sort of my motto is, again, if you can do it in SQL, do it in SQL.
If you could do it simply, do it simply.
And if you can do it simply, try to find a simpler way to do it and then do that. So that's kind of what we have. And
happy to field any questions from anybody else. I'm sure you're all wildly interested in home building in Oklahoma, so feel free to ask any and all questions there.
Yeah, we're happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. That was super interesting, and I love that you're using the Google Sheets Connect.
Please summarize. Thank you, everybody.
This is obviously a wildly different use case, but I'm sure there's some questions from some of you.
Not a real test. Can we answer that?
You are the perfect use case that I get all the time, where people come up and say, should I use Trino and hire engineers or Starburst? And I usually just tell them, throw $30,000 at Starburst and go your way.
Yeah.
Don't try and bring up all this infrastructure yourself.
Yeah, I know how to do it, and that's why we pay Starburst.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jamie Kaufman online. Do you use Spark in your pipelines at all?
Absolutely not.
Another fantastic reason for not using
Okay,
Spark.
so I have before, and yes, I know how to use Spark and PySpark and do that with Glue and everything else. Honestly, it's like just too heavyweight for what we're doing. Again, we have a 2-worker cluster that is still wild overkill. Why would we spin up an entire Spark cluster to do all of this? And so again, keeping it as simple as possible, process the data where we're going to access it.
Awesome.
Microphone. What did you learn about building homes in Oklahoma through this process?
That it is a monstrous undertaking that I had no idea about. Well, I know this isn't necessarily Trino focused here, but I think outside of building all of the parsers for the first 2 months, I mean, maybe not that long, but for the first long while I was at Executive Homes, I probably spent 4 times that trying to learn all of the lingo, all of the different phases of construction. I mean, it is just really, I know this is probably a bit of an overkill exaggeration here, but it really kind of feels like an air traffic controller of people. You have subcontractors coming in and out on hundreds of different homes every day, and we're a small company. I mean, in total, including office, maybe around 50 or so.
Something like that. Yeah.
And so being able to now scale up and stuff, that presents the problem, right? You have all of this stuff going on every single day. Which guy is going to be at the house at 5:30 a.m. to make sure that it's open for the people to get in and do this? Which, how much is this selling? Contacting the municipalities for the correct permits and everything. I mean, it is just a slew of messy things, and the fact that not to toot our own horn too much but the fact that they can actually take all of that mess out of the customer's hands and do it in a smooth way that gets the same kind of quality every time is a really impressive feat. And I can't even take credit for this because that was there before I got here, but we're just making it that much better.
And from a data perspective, just to give you a little bit of context about the number of different things that we're tracking through the phase of building a house, I think on my second day, Tommy was walking me through it, and it was something like 800 columns in one sheet. It was absolute insanity, and I said that there is no way that we were going to continue to work like this.
Yeah.
Kind of right from the start.
Untenable.
But so there's a lot to track, and everything has to get done correctly the first time if possible. So.
Yeah, the first time.
There's a lot of moving pieces for sure.
Yeah, I think similar to software products in building and construction, issue managers are not used enough, project managers non-existent, and costs are overrun.
Right, yeah, right, exactly.
Cool, I think there's a question online.
Yeah, this may be a controversial question for Trino
Love it.
Fest,
Uh,
but it's why don't you use a tool like DuckDB for such a small scale instead?
we do use DuckDB for dashboarding, but you know, we don't. DuckDB doesn't have all of the same integrations that Trino does. And
I think what is ultimately saying is that we use tools, not toys.
yes.
That, it's bunnies to ducks.
I'm going to
I mean, come
retract
on.
my answer and defer to Manfred's answer. No, we love DuckDB as well. We use it for our dashboard deployments for when we need something in process. And you know, we can reach out to S3, read Parquet files and stuff like that. But if we need to do integrations and things like that, you know, then our options are a little bit more limited with what we can actually connect to.
Awesome. All right, I think that was it. Thank you
Awesome.
again
Thank
so
you so
much.
Thank you, everybody.